Based on the anime series of the same name, Legends of the Dark King is a 3D fighter that brings together several characters from the Fist of the North Star universe. The most striking aspect of the game has to be the visuals that look incredible on the small screen, and are presented in a clearly defined cel-shaded fashion that brings life to each and every character you get to use. As you would expect, they all come along with their own unique movesets, with basic attacks and special moves making up your options when it comes to each fight, and by attacking your opponent or taking damage yourself, you'll start to build up your ultimate gauge at the bottom of the screen, which can then be used to unleash a devastating attack, ripped straight out of the anime with plenty of fanfare and impressive animations to go along with it. Naturally, there's several modes for the player to get stuck into, from the main story to free battle and survival, that tasks you with defeating as many characters as you can, with only limited life regeneration between each fight. To top it all off, there's a ton of unlockable content that comes in the form of new characters and stages that will likely satisfy those fond of the source material. On the whole, Legends of the Dark King is by no means the best fighting game on the PSP. The simple approach to its gameplay opens it up to players of all skill levels, but for those of you who like their fighters to offer a serious amount of depth within their systems, there's just not that much here. On the other hand, if you're fond of the Fist of the North Star property or simple fighting games in general, then Legends of the Dark King is definitely worth tracking down. Dead to Rights Reckoning is a third-person shooter that throws you into the shoes of Jack Slate, who wakes to find out that a senator's daughter has gone missing and sets out to get to the bottom of her disappearance. This journey takes you through the seedy underbelly of Grant City, where you'll be encountering all manner of lowlifes as you slowly make your way through the enemy ranks and ultimately deliver justice. The gameplay is very similar to its home console counterparts and retains the series' signature use of bullet time, as well as your canine companion that, in tandem with the gunplay, can make short work of the enemy. As with most PSP shooters, the controls at first can be a bit awkward, with the camera taking a bit of time to get used to as the player has no control of its direction. You can quickly center the screen by tapping the lock-on button, which is a nice workaround for the lack of a second analog, but it can get a bit unwieldy at times in the heat of a firefight. That being said, the minute-to-minute gunplay is where Dead to Rights shines, and is all built around a combo system that rewards the player for successful kills. It's basically about destroying everything in sight, and you have many ways to accomplish this, including guns, your dog, and the ever popular takedowns, which in essence allows you to run up to an enemy, take them out with his own weapon, and then continue using his gun to take down all his comrades. It's a great system that keeps the action fast and frantic as you mow down wave after wave of enemies. For an action game on the go, Dead to Rights Reckoning is perfect for short bursts of gameplay, and has ended up being one of my go-to options when looking for something to quickly pick up and enjoy. Seventh Dragon 2022 is a direct sequel to the previous game in the series, and centers around a specialized task force that work for the Japanese government. It's their job to spearhead the destruction of mysterious monsters and dragons that have begun to materialize throughout Tokyo, and this is where the journey kicks off, with the player getting to create their own character from scratch and head out into the city to clean it up. As with many RPGs, the class system is at the heart of the experience, and cooks up 5 separate options for the player to choose from. You've got the standard tank and mage, as well as several unique options that offer a blend between the two that can focus on your overall speed in battle or ability to cast certain spells. Now, the actual battles themselves are your typical turn-based fare, where you can attack, defend, use items, escape, and also carry out a variety of skills thanks to the exhaust gauge. You fill this gauge up by attacking enemies, and when used, your turn speed is increased, as well as your attacks and special abilities having an improved effect. All of these options come into play when encountering any of the enemies that roam the city, but the system in place truly shines when you come into contact with a dragon, which acts as a sort of boss that breaks up the rather easy fights with the low-level grunts. By defeating them, you'll earn DZ, which is your primary way of getting new skills, equipment, and side quests, so in a way it acts like a gameplay loop. You hunt dragons to get better tools, to hunt more dragons to get even better tools. Seventh Dragon 2022 is a solid RPG, and sure, it doesn't do anything new, and it'll likely have nothing you haven't seen before from the genre, but it still remains enjoyable, and is by far one of the best examples of an RPG on the PSP. First appearing on the PlayStation 2, the Killzone series was essentially Sony's answer to Microsoft's Halo, and while it didn't really reach the heights set by its competition, it was still a competent first-person shooter that went on to spawn several entries and a few spin-offs, including Liberation on the PSP. Now, unlike its console counterpart, Liberation was instead a top-down shooter that instantly managed to alleviate many of the concerns players had with FPS games on the PSP. The game's story itself is fairly average and really nothing you haven't seen before, which all revolves around shooting your way through the enemy ranks and rescuing various VIPs to save the day. Where it really comes into its own though is during play, and shooting enemies is accomplished by aiming yourself towards them, using the analog and utilizing a range of options, from machine guns to special grenades and even tanks to even the score. Now, reloading and securing ammunition are critical components of the gameplay as well, since taking down individual targets usually involves at least expending a few magazines, so you'll be finding yourself short on ammo, especially if you're the kind who loves to just hold down the trigger. It's not all just about simply shooting everything that moves though, as Liberation also involves many defensive aspects of gameplay, with the main one being cover. You'll find yourself dropping behind fences and popping out from behind walls to score potshots as you carefully dismantle the enemy forces on your tail. In the end, Killzone Liberation is a very worthy addition to the PSP's lineup, and with it being so easy to pick up and play, it's a game I can fully recommend everyone tries out. The PSP had its fair share of first-person shooters, each of which were enjoyable to varying degrees of success. By far one of the best examples of the genre on the handheld has to be Coded Arms, that throws you into the shoes of a hacker who finds their way inside a virtual reality program known as Ada. The system has gone astray and has provided a means for you to take it over, which involves you having to get rid of viruses in the form of grotesque monsters. By no means is the story going to win any awards, and it generally feels like a bit of an afterthought, but makes way for what Coded Arms gets right, and that's the gameplay. At first you might think the lack of a second analog stick might hold the game back, but the developers came up with a way to compensate for this by automatically snapping onto enemies when they're in range of your crosshair, and it works really well across the several missions that see you cleaning up the battlefield and taking advantage of a wide range of weapons, such as pistols to shotguns and grenades, that all have a role to play throughout the campaign. As you progress, you'll be leveling them up and unlocking new attachments to augment their capabilities that give you even more options to deal with the diverse set of enemies that come your way, from the lowly grunts that only take a few hits to deal with to the far more challenging boss fights that offer up a real sense of accomplishment once you've taken them out. On the whole, Coded Arms more than proved that first-person shooters were not only viable on the PSP, but surprisingly enjoyable as well, considering the somewhat limited input options you have to play with. If you find it on the cheap, it's well worth adding to your library. The PSP was one of the first handhelds to offer a digital store for its owners to download games, and this prompted many companies to try their hand at this new model. This is where Ape Quest comes in, and was originally released as 3 separate bite-sized episodes that flipped the usual Ape Escape formula on its head. Like the title suggests, Ape Quest is an RPG that sees you filling the role of a prince who unwittingly releases a forgotten evil upon the land, and you are then tasked with putting things right. This comes in the form of taking on a variety of quests that requires you to explore the kingdom and often sees you delivering items, escorting characters, or locating rare objects. However, you're not free to walk about as in many other RPGs, with movement instead being dictated by arrows that define your possible paths. Of course, to spice things up, you'll encounter random events on your way, ranging from minigames such as tennis and whack-a-mole to battle encounters that take advantage of the RPG mechanics in play. As you would expect, you'll be leveling up over the course of the adventure as well, and unlocking a huge range of attacks and special abilities that even the odds. But just as important as that is the equipment you wield as well. From weapons to armor and special items, you'll be crafting new ways to tackle each encounter. Overall, if you're fond of the Ape Escape series and are looking for a new RPG to jump into, then Ape Quest is well worth your time. It may not be the most feature-rich RPG on the PSP, but it's still one hell of a good ride. The PSP was no stranger to solid fighting games, and with the likes of Tekken and Street Fighter making appearances, it was one of the go-to systems for fans of the genre. Much like any other console though, many games seemingly fall through the cracks and never get their chance in the limelight, and Fate Unlimited Codes has to be one of them. It's based on a series of Japanese visual novels with a story revolving around a mysterious item known as the Holy Grail that can grant any desires to the one who wields it. Now, like most fighting games, there's a generous amount of characters to choose choose from, who each come with their own basic attacks, as well as special moves that spice up each encounter. You have 3 standard attack buttons, weak, medium and heavy, along with a parry button that can get you out of some tight situations, but if you miss the timing, you're punished with half of your super meter being taken away from you. The way to build this up is by dealing out damage and also taking hits, and once it's full, you get to perform one of the many super moves that are all accompanied by dazzling and stylish animations that lend them a real weight as you pulverize your competition. Like many fighting games, there's a great selection of unlockables that help pad out the experience and give you an incentive to keep on coming back for more. New characters, stages and modes ensure you'll be playing long after your first win, and although it may not be the most intricate fighting game on the PSP, it's for sure one hell of a lot of fun, especially for fans of the graphic novel and the other Fate games on the PSP. So if you've all but exhausted many of the fighting games on the system, Fate Unlimited Codes is definitely something you should check out. Pangea Fantasy Golf is a golf game for the PSP that supported the PC MMO game of the same name. While the PSP version isn't online and only incorporates a fraction of what the PC game had to offer, it still packs an incredible amount of content that makes other golf games on the system seem half-baked in comparison. The somewhat childish, cheerful exterior of the game is bolstered by several RPG mechanics that lend it a serious amount of depth, and during the course of the game you'll need to level up your characters, sift through some entertaining story elements, and earn Pang, the game's currency, to buy new equipment and outfits that alter your stats and affect your proficiency out on the course. Regardless of these RPG mechanics, Pangea is still a golf game at heart, and reading the course, judging wins, and ensuring accurate shots is the best way to move forward in the game. It uses the traditional 3-click method for each shot you take. The first click starts the meter, the second sets the strength of your shot, and the third sets the accuracy. But to add some variety and personality to the game, you've got several types of special shots to perform as well that can be incredibly tricky to pull off, but once you do, you're rewarded with even more amounts of currency to work towards unlocking some of the game's more powerful items. There's seriously just so much to do in this game. Customizing your characters is almost limitless, taking first place in all of the tournaments will take quite a commitment, and unlocking all of the characters and equipment will take more time than completing 2 or 3 average-sized RPGs. So if you enjoy golf and are looking for something a bit more well thought out than a glorified minigame, then Pangea Fantasy Golf is for you. Ever since Diablo, hack-and-slash RPGs have become a dime a dozen. Scores of imitations of the popular PC game have been released across every console under the sun, so it's no surprise that the PSP got one right out of the gate. Your role in this game is that of a protector of a city known as Avon, and after it's hit by a group of otherworldly monsters, you work towards getting to the bottom of what's going on. Of course, none of that really matters. The thing about hack-and-slash RPGs is the storyline is there just to facilitate the gameplay, and this is where Untold Legends comes into full swing. The first thing to mention is the sheer size of the game world, which for a PSP game was really impressive. Portals make it easy to travel from area to area, and you can exit dungeons at any time with the press of a few buttons, which make it easy to jump about. A traditional over-the-head camera leads you through each dungeon and feels like the perfect distance is to not give away what's around the corner, but not too close to the action that it becomes too chaotic. Now, what is arguably the best part of the game is leveling up, which allows you to build your character the way you see fit by unlocking various abilities that will help you out in the field. Complementing this system is your armor and a range of items that can aid you in your bid to rid the kingdom of evil, and more importantly, play into your specific approach to hack-and-slash RPGs. May that be fighting from a distance or getting up close and personal with one of the many weapons by your side. Admittedly, it can get quite repetitive, as most games of this kind do, but for those that it clicks with, Untold Legends will provide hours upon hours of enjoyment. I've always been a huge fan of the Dot Hack series, with several of the PlayStation 2 games being among my favourite titles on the system, so getting to play it on the PSP felt like a dream come true. For those not familiar with the series, it revolves around an in-game MMO called The World, where the player controls an avatar within that digital space. It picks up after the events of the PS2 games and introduces us to Tokyo, a young boy who must go back through the records stored in the MMO and relive all of the events of the entire series in the hopes of correcting various corruptions in the system. Now when it comes to gameplay, it's largely split up into two separate styles, one being the exploration of the world and the other naturally being combat, that sees you commanding a huge array of abilities and attacks that can make short work of the enemy. A big part of each encounter is taking advantage of the juggling system that allows you to perform a string of combos on the enemy and keep the battle flowing. By successfully landing enough hits, you'll build up your super gauge and get to perform one of the many special moves you have at your disposal that are accompanied by some impressively animated cutscenes which lend them all a real grandiose effect as they play out. Apart from fighting, there's also several other systems that make up the game, with the most rewarding being the relationships you'll cultivate along the way. By hitting dungeons with the same party members, you'll slowly build an affinity with each other that leads to being able to perform longer combos, and therefore your team become a far more threatening force to be reckoned with. For fans of .hack, this is one game you will not want to miss. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos that release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.